Hello and welcome to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, policy, and politics that drive Texas. I'm your host, Brian Phillips. I'm the Chief Communications Officer at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And so early in the season, Derek has already decided to take a day off, despite that we're all in session. No, I'm just kidding. But we are graced, of course, with our Vice President of Policy here at TPPF, Andrew Brown. Thanks for stepping in and taking over and being a better host than Derek.
Well, I mean, what else can I say but you're welcome?
Well, for what we're talking about today, this actually makes a lot of sense because we're going to go through on Sunday. The Governor Abbott released his emergency items, the call, as they say. And so for the next 30 days before March 1st, these will be the items that actually can go and be debated on the floor. They're the emergency items, so it can actually go into committee, get on the floor, have a debate, have votes on them. And so it's really important, I think, that these are the issues we're going to be talking about for the next 30 days. So to have Andrew here to help us break down each one of those. I think there's 6 or 7 items. Yeah. Most of them will be familiar to you, things like school choice and property tax, but some of them not so much, maybe cyber command, things like that.
There's always a few curveballs.
Yeah, so we're glad that you're going to be here to help us break that down, but this is still the right idea, and so we always like to start with something fun at the beginning of the show, our hot takes. Of course, the biggest news around the world, international headlines were made when Luka Doncic out of nowhere was traded to the Los Angeles Lakers for a decent player.
Anthony Davis.
Yeah, a decent player and a handshake, I guess, is basically what they got for it. But anyway, that begs the question, what do you think? We won't include this one, but what do you think in sports history, what have been the worst and the best sports trades of all time, in your opinion?
You know, in terms of bests, I got to go with my Dallas Cowboys.
Of course, yeah.
Trade Herschel Walker for, I think it was 6 players and 12 draft picks.
Oh, my gosh.
So some of the players that came in as a result of this one deal, Emmitt Smith, Darren Woodson, and then the foundational pieces that led to that epic 90s run of Super Bowl championships, right? This one deal, giving Herschel Walker away to Minnesota, getting draft picks, direct player trades, gave Jimmy Johnson all of the tools that he needed to build those epic 90s Dallas Cowboys teams that I miss so badly right now.
I don't think a lot of people would disagree with you. I think that was one of the first things I thought of when we were thinking about this question was obviously the Herschel Walker trade.
Oh, yeah. And, you know, it's not necessarily the worst, but right there in contention for the worst is everything the Cowboys have done since they've fired Jimmy Johnson.
Well, I think it's really ironic. We talked about this with Jerry before. It's really ironic that trade stands out amongst the best moves from any general manager, ever in the history of football, maybe even sports. And yet Jerry Jones has then spent the last, 30 years since the Super Bowl, the last Super Bowl they won, being the absolute worst general manager in the history of sports.
Horrendous decisions.
But what's your best one or your
my worst?
Sorry, your worst.
I mean, I think you have to go with Babe Ruth. The Red Sox selling Babe Ruth to the Yankees, creating a legitimate curse. This trade was so bad that it affected space and time and cursed the Red Sox for like 100 years, right? The curse of the Bambino over this one trade. I mean, how can you get much worse than that?
Yeah, that was bad. So in the interest of time, I will actually make my worst and best the same one because it obviously worked out for one team and not for the other. But in 1982, Moses Malone was traded after winning the MVP. I mean, this is kind of like the thing with Luka, although he didn't win it last year. He certainly could have deserved it, and he took his team to the championship. Moses Malone in 1982 won the MVP and then was traded to the Philadelphia 76ers, where he proceeded to win the MVP again, and they won the championship. The 76ers did. So good on them, but probably the worst for the team that traded him. So, all right. So we'll move on from that and not talk about the other conspiracy theories that are in and around the Luka deal. We'll save that for another show. All right, so shameless plug. We're going to do something a little special real quick, but I do want to shamelessly plug, of course, our Texas Policy Summit, which is coming up, texaspolicysummit.com. There might be some chairs available somewhere in the back of the auditorium, so if you haven't RSVP'd for that and you want to go check out Texas Policy Summit and see if you can get in. If you can't, the good news for you is we live stream everything, every single panel, every single speaker, every single word that's said, from our keynotes to all of the various issue panels that we do. All of it is live streamed, so you can watch it online live. But in case you miss it, we record everything and we will post everything to our YouTube channel, usually within about 24 hours. If Dan Patrick, I don't know, maybe he might say something spicy once in a while. He always makes a headline. Usually if it's something like that that's very newsworthy, we'll get it up in a couple hours, and so we'll be able to get that out. So Texas Policy Summit is coming up February 19th through the 21st. It is here in Austin at the AT&T Hotel. So if you're planning to protest, make accommodations now. But otherwise, you can watch it online and then watch it, and then we'll have it up for posterity's sake after that. I also want to shamelessly plug a new video that we have. We started a new video series on education spending, looking at not only how much money is going into the education system, the $93 billion that we spent the last year and a half or a year and a half ago on education spending. And so we have the first video that we've promoted that kind of talks about that. But the new video talks about a lot of the reckless and wasteful spending that is going on within our education system, and kind of the system that propagates all of that and ensures that your taxes will never go down, that the spending no one will ever be held accountable for the spending. So we talk a little bit about that in a new video. I want to give you a little excerpt right now.
School districts borrow tens of billions for questionable projects. McKinney ISD built a $70 million football stadium, while Cypress Fairbanks spent $80 million on theirs. La Jolla ISD has a $20 million water park and a $5 million golf course that loses hundreds of thousands of dollars for the district every year. Carthage ISD once had Texas's largest and most expensive jumbotron, measuring 44 feet wide and costing $750,000. But Brownsville ISD topped it with a $1.5 million 66-foot scoreboard. The two districts have something else in common. The scoreboards aren't well read, as only half the students in the district can read at grade level. The lavish and irresponsible spending doesn't stop there. Roscoe ISD pays a contractor $46 million to operate a virtual school, nearly 10 times its teacher pay and benefits budget. And then there's Granbury ISD, which bought a Cessna Skyhawk. That's right, Texas school districts buy planes and justify it as essential for teaching aviation. However, most flights were later found to be for personal and non-instructional use.
Please make sure your seatbelts are buckled and tray tables are up, as school districts take taxpayers for a bumpy ride.
The heist is a massive transfer of billions of dollars from taxpayers into a machine that maintains, grows, and protects a system designed to ensure taxes always go up, the money always comes in, and there's no accountability for how it's spent. This should be simple. Schools must prioritize critical resources on the things that actually improve education outcomes. No one should be getting rich off the backs of Texas students and teachers, especially when results continue to plummet. As long as nothing changes, education costs and your taxes will keep rising without ever benefiting students, teachers, or the future of Texas.
And you can watch the full video at our YouTube page. Just search for TPPF on YouTube, or you can go to my Twitter at RealBphil or the TPPF Twitter. Again, we're promoting that right now, so you can watch the full video through those various channels. Okay, let's get to why we're here. Andrew, again, thank you so much for coming in, and you're going to help us break down all these really important issues. Again, to set it up, the governor gave his emergency items on Sunday during his State of the State speech, which I thought was a fantastic speech, and really shows, how important this session is going to be. So it's not just the emergency items that we're going to get to work on the next 30 days, but really laid out what his agenda was for the next 5 months. And just some really critically important things, from infrastructure to education to healthcare and all of that. But to break down really what we're going to be talking about for the next 4 weeks, are the emergency items. And off the top, the very first one is property tax. So number one, tell us a little bit about, that issue, what do you think that means, that's like one of the number one issues for the governor? And then tell us a little bit about what you think the legislation will look like.
Yeah. Well, property tax relief and reform has been one of the top issues amongst voters and at the legislature for the last several sessions, and for very good reason, right? Folks are seeing their property tax bills increase year after year after year. And it's becoming a source of frustration because people now really feel that the home that they own really isn't the home that they own, that there's this mechanism by which their local governments are able to essentially tax them out of their homes, that they've worked and put so much blood, sweat, and tears into achieving, for many people for the first time, that American dream of home ownership. But then the government can come in and say, well, we're going to keep raising your taxes for, these things that we will tell you are going to be good and benefit you and your children, but who knows what that money's actually used for.
Yeah, I talk to people all the time that say that they pay more in property tax every month than they do for their mortgage.
Oh, yeah, it's becoming a huge piece. And, people protest. That's one way that, at least in my personal experience, I've seen trying to get that down and keep that upward pressure down is trying to protest every year. But there's only so much that you can do as that individual taxpayer against your local government that's just deciding, well, we can just take more money from the people who choose to live in our cities. And the difference I think that we're going to see this legislative session is, whereas previous sessions were really focused on relief and the best way to get more money back to the taxpayers, that's still going to happen this session. There's conversations about what's the right type of relief. But you'll also see work on reform and trying to prevent these local governments from gobbling up the relief that the legislature provides. One of the big lessons that was learned between the 88th and the 89th sessions was the legislature can pass historic levels of relief, immense amount of money intended to go back to the taxpayers.
The largest tax
property tax
decrease
in history. Huge amount of that was gobbled up by local governments before it even got to the taxpayers through the various schemes that they were brazen about it. A lot of them spoke publicly about, here's how we can get our hands on that money that the legislature intended to go to the taxpayer.
I think some of us in the weeds, you and James Quintero and others who've been talking about this issue, for 4 or 5 years, I think it's really reassuring that now this is starting to get to the top. In his speech during the State of the State, the governor said, last session we slashed your property taxes, but for many Texans, those cuts were wiped out by local taxing authorities that hiked your property taxes even more. This must end this session. That is a fantastic turnaround to be simply focusing on what the state can do to cut taxes. That's usually kind of where they sort of focus their energies. But now, like you're saying, they're realizing that the problem is we could keep giving tax cuts, year after year after year. But if the local taxing entities gobble that up, the taxpayer doesn't feel any of that.
Right.
And so then what happens is they think that the state legislators are lying. They think that the governor's lying, and they point the finger at the state and say, "What happened to our big tax cut?" It's very encouraging that they realize that this is a major issue and they're going to do something about it this session.
And they're mad about it too. Conversations leading up to session, conversations I'm having in the building with members now, they are mad about this issue because they are trying to benefit the average Texan. That person who's working hard to provide for their family, to put a roof over their family's head, that's who they care about. And that desire, that intention on the part of the people's elected representatives is being thwarted by greedy local governments.
So at the risk of nerding out here a little bit, let's get into some of the details. Last session, there was a big divide between the House and the Senate on this issue. I'm not sure where that stands now, especially now that there's a new speaker. But, whether it's homestead exemptions or compression or something about both, TPPF, our position has always been, yes and
please.
All of the above, whatever you got to do to get these taxes down. But what where is that? Do you feel like there's been a cooling off period, and now that there's new leadership, I hear that the breakfasts are happening again, and that that the leadership is meeting, and so maybe there'll be if there are differences, maybe it'll be handled in a way where we can get to a constructive solution a little bit quicker, maybe.
Yeah, obviously the personalities have changed somewhat. And I think what you're seeing is there's new leadership in the House. And so Lieutenant Governor is going to give that new leadership the opportunity. And historically, I know that Speaker Burrows and the Lieutenant Governor have worked very well together. And so I think you have an established relationship between two out of the big three that need to come together on this. That doesn't mean they're not going to have their differences. Those differences are still going to exist with the Senate favoring homestead exemptions, the House favoring compression. As you said, we're kind of like porque no los dos. But I think signs are all pointing to you'll have a deal
Right.
that I think will make both chambers happy. That's the hope.
And maybe the one thing they can agree on, even if they have to compromise some way on those other issues, the one thing we can agree on is getting a hold of the locals.
Absolutely.
And whether that's, revenue caps or just flat out, I mean, you heard the governor talk about not raising taxes without a 2/3 vote at the local level. I mean, that would start to send the right message that that the locals need to get reined in.
Right, and there's even conversations about how do we do a better job of informing taxpayers at the ballot box about what this is actually going to do. We have language on ballots right now that's saying in big bold letters, this is a property tax increase. Now, cities and counties in their brilliance have figured out ways of kind of burying it and hiding it and making it blend in a little bit. But I'm hearing conversations even about putting information on the ballot about if you vote yes and this property tax increase passes, here's how it's going to impact the average homeowner. Like actually putting the numbers of voting yes hurts you this much in your pocketbook.
Right. Okay, let's get to another issue that maybe is people know a little bit less about, although, of course, we use water every day. But this is something that, State Senator Charles Perry has been very big on. And then in the House, Cody Harris is going to lead the way, it looks like, on some of these issues. But what maybe for people who don't understand, anybody who lives in the 35 corridor, they turn on the water and, it comes on and everybody has an issue with it. But for people who maybe live in, more rural or suburban areas, this water's a real issue. I mean, in West Texas, it's a very big issue. You talk to state senators and folks out there, and when you talk to them about what are you working on, it's one of the top 2 or 3 issues right there with property tax and education. But now it's an emergency item. It's not just it's not just a proposal that Charles Perry's running around with. This is something that the governor said we need to do this now. What would be the nature of the reform? What's the nature of the problem? What would be the reform for that?
Yeah. As everyone knows, Texas is growing. We're growing at a record pace and have been for a long time. Lots of folks are wanting to move to Texas for the freedom and prosperity that we offer. They're not bringing water with them, right? So we're having a growth in population that the infrastructure is quickly becoming inadequate to support. And is
it the amount of water, or it's the ability to get water from where it is to where it needs to be, or is it both?
It's kind of both.
Okay.
The bigger issue, I would think, is the ability to get the water from where it is to where it needs to be. Because if you look at the hydrological maps of Texas and where the water is and where it isn't, you look at Houston, southeast Texas all the way up through East Texas, there's quite a bit of water there. The further west you go, the more arid, the more dry it becomes, and the more precious that water is. And so you really have a situation in Texas where you have a water-rich section of the state and a water-poor section of the state. And the question is, how do you get a market in place that allows for the most efficient transfer of the water resources that we have in the state of Texas to serve the population, to get it in the areas that are in need, but do it in a balanced way where you're not depriving certain geographical areas of the water that they need to sustain.
Because it's not like an energy plant where you can just, if you need more energy in this particular area, you can go put in a natural gas plant, and as long as you can get the natural gas there, through trucks and pipes and whatnot, then, you're serving that area. It's right there. I mean, water is either there or it's not.
Right.
And it's not like you can, I guess in some respects, you can't just like build a reservoir or redesign the river to run through a particular area. Right. It's completely different than electrical energy.
Yeah, and you're dealing with issues of potable water, what comes out of our taps and our fridge filters that we drink every day, but you're also dealing with industrial uses of water as well for agricultural uses and other like heavy industries that are needing water. And that's where you get into some of the more technological aspects of this, like desalination. How do you use salty, brackish water and purify it for other purposes where that salt, that brackishness could actually be harmful in like an agricultural standpoint or for certain industries. I know that's a big question because that's an expensive process.
Yeah.
So how do you do more of desalination to, be able to use previously unusable water and then free up the fresh water that we use for agriculture and for daily uses at
And
home.
you said it was expensive. I mean, the governor's talking about the largest investment in history and fixing our infrastructure up to $1 billion over 10 years. New funds that they want to create, and these are kind of things that make conservatives a little icky when you start hearing about invest is kind of a liberal word that they use when they want to spend a bunch of money, and new funds. You worry about the accountability of some of these funds. Are there discussions about, if that's the direction that the governor wants to go or the legislature wants to go, making sure there are safeguards so that the money is spent in the way that it needs to be spent, so that it's, that it's fairly distributed to the various areas that need it and all that. I'm sure there's discussions about that on those bills.
Yeah, absolutely. And from what I'm hearing, this is going to be Senator Perry's magnum opus in terms of just long-term, generationally impactful bills. And he's very well suited for this. This has been a passion of his for a long time. He's incredibly well educated on this subject, probably the smartest person in the legislature on this issue. And we talk about what's the proper role of government. And inherent to that question is the acknowledgement that there is a proper role of government. There is a role for government to play. We would argue at TPPF that it's a very limited one, but something like water, getting this basic thing that's so critical for the sustaining of human life, the prosperity of an economy, and the prosperity of the state, that type of work, we would say this is a proper role of government as long as government does it responsibly.
Right.
And from everything I'm seeing and hearing, it does look like this is going to be done responsibly. And in terms of waste, a big issue we've heard about is just the age of the pipes.
Yeah, they're just leaking.
They're just leaking. All of this water is being
so it's not
lost
like we have to
the ground.
dig huge tunnels out into West Texas. It's a lot of it's just fixing the
Just to
stuff
fix
that's
a
already
pipe.
there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's we'll keep an eye on that. And as you said, Senator Perry's been working on this for a long time, so it's not like this is something that just came up and we're having to do a bunch of research on how to fix it.
Right.
It's just now that it's become so important because it's become such a big problem that now it needs to be an emergency item. The third one is the governor talked about is education. Of course, we'll talk about school choice, but increasing teacher pay is one of the emergency items there. That seems to be something that left, right, and center, everybody agrees teachers need to be paid more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the video that we showed off the top of the segment today really emphasizes why this is an issue, right? So much of the money that the state invests in education is being siphoned away to administrators and contractors and debt. And that money's not getting to where it most needs to be, which is in the classroom. And it's in the pockets of these teachers who have an important and incredibly difficult job to do. If we want to attract and retain the top educators in the world, in the nation, we need to be able to make it attractive to become a teacher in Texas. And that starts, it's not just as simple as, well, let's just raise teacher pay. It starts with reining in the irresponsible, wasteful spending practices of local school districts that are inhibiting the ability of teachers to make really what they're worth, the best teachers to make what they're worth. And I think that reform aspect is going to be so key to addressing the issue of teacher pay and reining in that waste that happens at the school.
And they've always talked about, to your point, it's not just about increasing the salaries. It's also, mentorship programs and continuing education and, teacher incentives, for performance incentives, essentially to, the governor talked about making upwards of six figures for teachers should be a regular thing. That should be a normal thing. And it shouldn't be just, someone who spent 30 years in the system. We should have incentives programs that get people quickly to that level if they're some of the best teachers in the state. So we'll see how that legislation, the devil will be in the details on that one. He also talked about CTE, so training, essentially workforce training for students and getting students, workforce training while they're in high school, not just, training programs once you graduate or once you don't graduate, but actually getting kids some skill, some marketable skills while they're in school so that, we can fulfill some some of these, huge holes in our industries, plumbers and welders and those kinds of things. If kids decide, I've got parents that we talk to here in the building all the time that say, some of my kids, one of my kids absolutely wants to go to university and wants to go to Texas or A&M and wants to go study to be an engineer. Another one just wants to work with his hands right now. And, if that child doesn't need to go to a university, go to a mentorship program and start making $80,000, 2 years out of high school because he owns his own welding business, why wouldn't that be an option? Why shouldn't that be an option for some kids? And so we're talking about CTE because those would be the programs that would help kids get there.
This is something that TPPF has long championed, doing more career technical education in schools, because when you and I were growing up, it was graduate high school, go to college, get your 4-year degree, and you're set for life. Mm-hmm. That's not the reality. That's not the case anymore. And kids are growing up with, I would say, a much higher level of uncertainty.
Yeah. And debt too.
Debt.
I think it was like $1,500 a semester at UT whenever I was there.
Yeah.
That's not remotely the case these days.
Not at all. And I think there's also an increasing recognition of college is not necessarily the only path for achieving prosperity. Especially as technology just expands and is so much more accessible, and you got kids in schools who are creating incredible things with just because they know how to use all of these apps and the programming languages that are out there. The joke "learn to code" is almost cliche now, but that's a legitimate pathway to earning immense amounts of money. The skilled trades, you mentioned plumbers and HVACs, people who own their own plumbing and HVACs business regularly make well into the six figures. And so these are things that you don't need a college degree for. And
one of the aspects of that is that we're hearing from communities is, the families want their kids to stay home. It's one, they like the rural life and they like the community and they know everybody, but kids go off to Austin or wherever, to Houston, to go to school, and then they end up staying there because that's where the jobs are. And then they build families there. The grandkids are there. They never come home, and this actually would offer even just more benefits than just, career opportunities. This would offer opportunities for small towns or mid-sized towns to continue to thrive because those kids could stay in those communities and be the HVAC operator or the plumber or the mechanic or whatever what have you.
Yeah, and bring those skills and build industry in their hometowns. I think career and technical education. I was a little surprised that it was an emergency item just because I hadn't heard a lot of rumblings around it, but it makes complete sense for it to be an emergency item, especially when you look at the emergency items in a whole. We're looking at the future of Texas here, whether it's improving parental choice in how they educate their children through ESAs and through school choice, whether it's investing in our water infrastructure to ensure that we have an adequate supply of water for future Texans, whether it's dropping property tax rates so more Texans can realize that American dream of owning their own home, career and technical education, investing in raising teacher pay and skilled educators. This group of emergency items that the governor has proposed are very forward-looking and looking at building a brighter, better Texas for the future.
So speaking of Texas future, of course, we have school choice. As we speak right now, today, Wednesday, the Senate is on the floor debating SB 2. Yeah. It is, of course, expected to pass on generally a party line vote there in SB 2. So let's look forward to the House. We know what's in SB 2. We talked about it. We had George Borrego came on one of our shows and explained to us what it was all about. So now looking forward to the House, rumors are milling that in fact, what normally takes place over in the House not only is not going to take place, but in fact, there are eyes on actually making SB 2 a better bill in the House than what the Senate is sending.
Yeah, I think that's a product of the changes that you've seen amongst the House memberships. Governor Abbott made good on his threat. We can do it the easy way or we can do it the hard way. And several members chose the hard way. And you saw this historic turnover amongst Republicans in the House and a huge influx of representatives who not only support school choice, but in many cases have been longtime advocates for school choice. So the dynamic in the House has dramatically shifted. And what you're seeing now is It's less of a matter of how far can we get, and it's more of a matter of what's the final vote tally going to be, right? The votes are there depending on who you talk to. There's varying levels of confidence as to how many votes are actually there. I think the votes are there. I still think it's going to be closer. But the closer you get to that magic number of 76, the harder it becomes for people who might be on the fence to stay on the no column.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you get to instead of 76, you can get to 86. I think one of the there are ways to fix what people don't like about maybe SB2. Some of the things they quote unquote don't like is because they want to enhance it. They want to make it stronger in certain areas. But I think there are some folks on the right or the left that have legitimate concerns about how the bill might work or how the money might be spread around, and so they can work on that in the House and make a bill more amenable to more people.
Which it's amazing that we're here today saying, well, the big debate's on how do we make this stronger?
Yeah, right.
Not just like what's the minimum viable product we can get through to get our foot in the door. It's how do we make this the best? And it will be the biggest first day universal school choice package in the history of these bills if it does pass.
Yeah, so meaning more children will be eligible for the ESA than on the first day than any other first day ESA program or first time ESA program in the country.
Right.
Which will be great. That'll be a great press release we can start writing now. All right, so we talked enough about school choice on the show for sure, so we will move on to other issues. Bail reform, that seems to be an issue that we seem to talk about almost every year. Yeah. TPPF, of course, is a very strong criminal justice department here, campaign here. So bail reform has been something that we've been after for a long time. I think in the last 4 or 5 years, just sort of public safety issues in general. I mean, certainly since the BLM riots of 2020 and other kinds of issues that have come up with illegal immigrants and some of the things that we've seen in the last couple of years, public safety has been a real issue. And then this issue of bail reform, which is once the person who's been accused of these horrible crimes, violent crimes and rapes and whatever, once they actually get arrested and they're behind bars, now you have a system in Texas which some things just don't make sense. I mean, they're required to get bail. In some instances, they're required to be able to that the bail has to be set at a reasonable level for them to be able to pay the bail. So you have, if you have low income people who commit, murders or rapes or something, they're getting out on, tens of thousands of dollars in bail, and people are looking at that going, what is going on? Right. And it's because of the rules. It's not necessarily even because of a judge or whatever. I think a lot of people point fingers, but it's actually because the
rules
law,
allow it.
The rules, require that.
Yeah.
And so we're gonna try and fix that. So what are they looking at right now?
Yeah, I was jokingly texting with our colleague Nikki Presley the night of the State of the State address when the governor announced bail reform, and he actually tipped his hat that this was going to be an emergency item on opening day. Governor Abbott addressed the Senate and brought up bail reform in his address to the Senate. Nikki and her team with the Right on Crime campaign have been working at this for a long time. And in many ways, they were out in front of this issue years ago. And I was kind of jokingly texting her because it's finally here. Bail has been one of those pushing the heavy stone uphill for the Right on Crime team for many years, but it's the right thing to do. And I think what it took was just every issue has to tip in the public consciousness, right? And that's one of the cool things about what we do at TPPF is, our job in many ways is to think years ahead of where the public is and think years ahead about what does Texas of the future look like and how do we help that Texas of the future be as prosperous as possible. And so that means you're going to spend several sessions trying to get a bill through that nobody's that interested in. They recognize that it's an issue, they're sympathetic to it, but it doesn't have that impetus, that sense of urgency around it. Well, we've gotten there. And I think we've gotten there because of multiple stories now that have gotten into the public consciousness of violent criminals being let out on really low bail who have then gone on to reoffend and potentially do worse things while they were out on bail.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the unfortunate part about this is that the tipping point is that more people get hurt,
right?
And more people get hurt in worse ways that people start, it starts to shock the consciousness of the public. And so, one thing Nikki would say is, transferring or taking a different approach, not setting bail in terms of the ability to pay, but setting bail based on the risk factor.
Exactly.
Irrespective of the person's socioeconomic status, if they've committed a heinous crime, particularly if they have a record of committing crimes like this, or they've just done something so awful, there should be a situation where you deny bail, or or at least you set it commensurate with the risk that this person poses to the public.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's bail reform. We will move on, and we're flying through. Okay, here's one that I'll just be real honest. Texas Cyber Command.
I know.
I was thinking Star Trek. I don't know.
That one was okay, this is interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know exactly what the emergency is there. And obviously I read up on this, and we're talking about hackers online.
Right.
Hackers have always been around. You always we're constantly taking these classes here at TPPF about how to avoid phishing scams and those kinds of things, and we kind of roll our eyes. Oh, nobody, I'm not dumb enough to open that email or that.
Put the respect on Captain El Pescador's name that it deserves.
I'll never hear the end of it now. But I'm way behind on taking those classes, so maybe I need to.
Don't tell Paul.
But but it's getting obviously more sophisticated, and every time we download some kind of new weapon or shield for our computers, the hackers develop a new weapon that gets behind the shield, and so it feels like, and maybe you've studied up a little bit more on this, but it feels like Texas is going to take a more proactive approach to protecting our systems, particularly the high value systems that we have, like infrastructure and those kinds of things. Yeah,
it's a matter of security and economics. So much of our world has shifted into that digital space. I don't really go to ATMs anymore. I won't carry cash because I can just swipe my phone at the 7-Eleven next door. Right. When you think about it,
I get upset when I can't buy something online.
Right.
Like when I actually have to go into a store and search around for stuff.
Yeah.
Like I always look online first to buy stuff. I can't, 10 years ago, I was like, I'm never putting my credit card on the internet. Now it's like, I can't buy it online.
Well, now I get upset, and this is real first world problems. I get upset when I'm, ordering takeout and I'm using my phone to do it, and it makes me enter my credit card number, and they don't take Apple Pay, where I can just hold my face up to my phone and it'll check me out.
Yeah.
But that presents so many opportunities for bad actors, for these hackers, to not just hurt each and every one of us individually, but potentially cripple the economy of the state, right? And we think about hackers as, nerdy guys in the basement with all these computers. I grew up in the 90s, so the image that always comes to my mind is The Matrix, right?
Right.
Neo and those guys. But what we're dealing with is sophisticated state actors, right? China, Russia. Warfare has shifted in many ways to the digital sphere because you can do so much damage to a nation and to a state like Texas without ever firing a shot. You just hack in to critical systems and critical infrastructure, shut it down, bring it offline, raid the bank account of the state, and there's nothing we can do. Put in a ransomware attack and force the state to pay to get the water
data back,
the water flowing again. We talked about water policy, water infrastructure. There's stories, I think it was Georgia maybe. I was talking to David Dunmoyer on our Better Tech for Tomorrow team about this early on. And there was a cyber attack on a water treatment facility. And somebody had hacked in and it was starting to mess with the chemicals that they use to treat the water and make it safe for human consumption. Well, the chemicals that they use, if they're not in the right balance, if one goes too high or another goes too low, you can actually poison the water supply. And so somebody was doing that, and it was only because there was a technician there who saw that this was happening and shut it down that this entire town would have been wiped out. Or a lot of people would have been sick and killed if that hacker had been successful in poisoning the water supply and they didn't have to physically be there.
So I guess we understand now why this is such a emergency item.
Yeah.
Particularly if if we've let this threat creep up on us, then it's something that needs to be addressed ASAP. All right, so that's all the emergency items. So I just want to go through, was there anything else? That wasn't all that the governor talked about at the State of the State. He talked about a lot of different issues. He talked about the new Texas Stock Exchange, which I didn't know what that was. But he talked about, fortifying the Texas grid. Talked about mental health care, which is another one that's going to be a big priority for the lieutenant governor. Obviously, DEI still, we haven't fully rid our public education system of DEI and its racist approach. There's other public safety issues involving child trafficking. Anything else? Nuclear. You talked about nuclear. That's a big issue for TPPF. Any other issues that they talked about that you think we need to hit?
Nuclear is one that's fascinating to me. With the advancement of these small modular reactors and the different ways nuclear energy can be deployed, the safety of it today, that really is the future. And I love that the governor is making this a centerpiece of his priorities, especially around securing our electric grid, because it's been decades since you've had a new nuclear site developed in this country. And there's now new technologies that make it much easier. Now, the problem is the regulatory framework that you have to navigate if you're going to try to develop and bring online a nuclear reactor is incredibly cumbersome and difficult to navigate. And so I'm hearing conversations around, well, how can we set up a Sherpa system almost in the state of Texas that helps industry navigate these regulatory hurdles and really do other things that can make Texas the most attractive place for people who are on the cutting edge of nuclear energy development to relocate their businesses to, and help us build and make Texas a leader in nuclear energy development. I think it's Abilene Christian University is on cutting edge of some of the research around the reactors and making them more efficient, making them cheaper to bring online. And so the opportunity right now for Texas is immense, and it looks like the governor's poised to take advantage of that opportunity.
One of the issues that's kind of under the radar that I'm kind of following is this issue of property rights and squatting.
Oh, yeah.
That kind of over the Christmas break and into the new year, it kind of blew up.
That was an overnight one.
Wasn't it crazy that it just kind of popped up and all of a sudden you realize that there's like these whole networks of people who are teaching each other how to squat and how to abuse the laws in a particular city and places like New York and Chicago. And then we realized kind of underneath our nose here in Texas, we kind of have a problem with our laws. And in fact, we TPPF put together a great video of somebody who was affected by that, who had a squatter in her house, and it was very difficult for her to get rid of. And you would think in a place like Texas, which has such a deep reverence and respect for property rights, that you think that would not be a problem here, but in fact it is. So I'm watching because I think this is a 90 to 10 issue. I don't even think know who the 10% is. It's really like a 99 to 1 issue. And so I'm interested to see how quickly that they fix this issue. I know Senator Paul Bettencourt has been very hot on this issue. So when he gets, a bug in his bonnet about something, things move pretty quickly.
Just get out of the way because he's coming.
Exactly. So I think it'll move through the Senate pretty quickly, and how strong and how forceful it will be, because what people expect is that if there's a squatter in your house, the cops show up, he's gone, and that's it. They don't expect this 90-day process where somebody has rights to your property because
you've got an unexpected roommate.
Yeah, exactly. Or they've been living in your house. I mean, this poor woman, her parents died and they were trying to get the house ready to sell, and they find out this guy's been wrecking the house and selling the furniture that was, her parents' furniture that, she'll never get back. But I want to see how quickly it moves, because I think this is one of those issues that no one's going to be, standing in the way of. And so I think it's to be very strong, very forceful, and very Texas. I think it's going to be a very good moment for Texas, a very good cultural moment for Texas to demonstrate how important property rights are to us here. And this will be a really good example of that. Okay, we are now about to jump into our 10-minute drill, where we jump through a couple of segments that we always like to do. So again, thank you, Andrew, for being on with us to kind of walk us through that. If y'all have any questions or any comments about that, obviously you can get in touch with us here at TPPF about how various legislation is going to work. We're all online. We're all on social media. And then, of course, the various ways to contact us through our website. So if you have any other questions that we didn't answer today, happy to answer those later. All right, let's jump into Survey Says. There's been a couple of polls. It's been 2 months since the election, and so the dust is kind of settled. And we know that it was a landslide for Trump. We know that the Republicans took over the Senate and they have the House, all the branches of government. We know in places like Texas, we extended, or the Republicans extended their lead in the various legislatures, and they had the overhaul that they had. And so once the dust settles and now the Republicans are kind of figuring out what's next and the Democrats are kind of figuring out what's next, the various organizations are doing some polling to figure out kind of where everybody kind of landed on that and why what happened. A few things that I thought were very illuminating is that, in general, one of the reasons why Republicans did so well last year is because to the American people, the right was focusing on the issues that actually mattered to the American people. Now, I know people will probably say, oh, well, you're just saying that because, you're a conservative and that's what you're supposed to say. But the data really, really showed that. And I want to explain that one data point. And again, this is a New York Times poll.
Known conservative outlet.
That's right. And so, they would skew it in favor of the Democrats. But the New York Times poll, they asked respondents to list what their number one priorities were. So, right, center, and left. What are your priorities? And then they asked them to then what they think the priorities of both parties are. So what are your personal priorities? And then what do you think the priorities of the GOP are? What are the priorities of the Democrats? Among the Democrats, just one of the top 5 overall priorities was on the Dem list, and that was the economy. So 4 other things that they think the Democrats care most about were not on the top 5 priority list for overall, for people overall. However, on the GOP side, there were 3 items that were on the overall list that they think the GOP cared about. But what's more interesting about that is that the 3 that they listed were number 1, number 2, and number 3 on the overall list. So number 1, immigration; number 2, the economy; and number 3, taxes. Mm-hmm. And so I think that shows that the American people care about issues X, Y, and Z, and they see the right is more focused on those issues. And I think that's why you see, that's good analysis by the New York Times to see that's why the election shifted the way that it did last year.
Yeah, well, these are kitchen table issues, mm-hmm. right? It was James Carville, the known, very famous Democrat campaign operative, got Bill Clinton elected president. Always fond of saying it's the economy, stupid, mm-hmm. right? And even if you watch some of his stuff after the election, he was railing against his own party for ignoring that basic truth. It's these kitchen table issues. It's the economy. It's taxes. And it's immigration, because immigration has become a kitchen table issue.
Right.
The unmitigated flow of illegal immigrants, and especially criminals, mm-hmm. cartels, over that southern border into the United States is affecting the livability of neighborhoods, of cities. It's affecting the economy. It's affecting jobs. And people have finally gotten fed up with it.
And the 4 issues that people thought the Democrats were most focused on were abortion, LGBTQ issues, climate change, and then healthcare. That's a legitimate issue. That actually was a top 10 issue. Was healthcare. But when the perception is that even though you might think those are important issues, that's not the most important thing in your life and what's going on in our country, and that someone else out there is speaking about the things in a way and speaking about the issues that you care about. Obviously, the implication there is that that group will care more about it. So anyway, I thought that was interesting to raise that.
3 out of 5 were divisive culture war issues on the Democratic side.
Right, exactly. And honestly, I guess part of the analysis is the American people aren't wrong. I mean, you can't look at the list and say, the Republicans weren't focused on immigration and border security, they weren't talking about inflation. That's all that Trump was talking about, right? And yes, he used the woke issues and things like that, which I think were 4 and 5 on those issues. And so he was definitely talking about those things. But, nobody can accuse them of not talking about immigration and border security. That clearly was. And the same thing goes on the left. I mean, their number 1 issue was abortion, and they were very clear about that.
It was intentional.
Yeah, very, very clear about that. And so, the fact that whatever the political malpractice that happened in the last election cycle, that somebody on the Democrat side convinced everybody that like this was going to be the issue that they won on, when for 2 years the American people were saying that the country was moving in the wrong direction and that inflation and economy were by far the number one issue. Somebody on the Democrat side said, no, let's talk about abortion. That's how we're going to win.
Well, and to be fair, they did have some success in the midterms focusing on abortion in the immediate aftermath of Dobbs.
Right.
The timing of that worked in their favor in the midterms. I don't think what they counted on was people are going to get used to the fact that Dobbs is now the law of the land, and the states are doing it on their own. States are having various approaches to it. And that's going to become less of an important issue.
As the Constitution intended.
As the Constitution intended. And that becomes less of an important issue driving what do I do for my federal elected officials? Because I can influence that in my state.
And I don't know if you saw I'm sure you didn't, because most people probably watching or listening didn't listen to it. But I enjoy these kinds of things. I actually listened into the Democrat National Committee's I guess it was a convention or conference they had where they elected their new chairman. Did you hear about any of this?
I didn't too. You are a huge nerd. You watched that. I
just
saw the headlines from it.
I guess because I've been in politics and campaigns and all this kind of stuff. I mean, this is the kind of stuff you sit around and think about. Like, when you lose campaigns, and I've lost more campaigns than I've won, you have that moment where you sit around and go, what could we have done different? Yep. If we're going to run again, what do we do differently next time? What's the mood of the people that we didn't understand? And you have, it might be in a private room, but you have that kind of come to Jesus moment where you try to figure out, what we did wrong. And so I'm always looking for evidence of that, on the Republican side as much as on the Democrat side. And so because this was everybody thought this was going to be a close election, and it wasn't, I was waiting for that moment for the Democrats, somebody to stand up and say, hey, we did things wrong. Like, we focused way too much on this and should have been on that. And there are some people that are doing that. There's a bunch of these, the podcast guy, the Pod Save America guys that are, used to work for the Obama administration. They actually, to their credit, have been going around saying that. And so they have been doing that. But the people who actually run the Democrat Party right now are not. And so I watched this conference, and I mean, it was all the stuff. It was all the woke stuff. It was all the land acknowledgments, and the Kamala Harris lost because America is sexist and racist. And they had a question. They said, who here thinks that's the reason? And literally every candidate for chairman raised their hand. So it was
couldn't have been us.
Yeah, and so there was no acknowledgement at all. Like, there wasn't even one brave soul to stand up and goes, hey guys, maybe we should have talked more about the kitchen table issues. Maybe we should have, thought more about how border security was going to affect this election, before we ignored it until the last 4 months. So anyway, but there was none of that. It was all just the circus clown show that you would expect to see 4 years ago, and now they're still doing it. So anyway, I thought that was fun to hit. And we are out of time, so I will jump to the last segment, the very last segment, which is what to watch for. And I'll let you go first. What to watch for? What are you looking at the next couple of weeks?
House leadership. We're going to hear committee assignments imminently, and that's going to give us a roadmap to take the next step into the legislative session. We're still in the bill filing period. Obviously, we can work on the governor's emergency items, but for about the next 36 days, bills are being filed. And so we're looking at what bills are being filed, how do those match up with TPPF's priorities for the legislative session, and then we're watching for who's going to be assigned to committees in the House, because that's going to give us a better idea of the path forward once we're able to start working on non-emergency items.
Some committees have shifted. There are committees that used to be there that are not there. There's
new
they
reorganized, and that happens from time to time between legislative sessions. Each legislature operates a little bit differently than the previous one. There was a lot of consolidation of committees that may be a little bit redundant of a broader committee. One of the more interesting things was the creation of some permanent subcommittees within committees that have a especially large jurisdiction of issues. That's one thing that I'm watching really closely is, one, who's going to be put on the subcommittees? What bills go there? And then how are those subcommittees utilized? Are they utilized as a tool for refining and making the committee process more efficient, which I think is very possible? Are they a tool to be used to send bills to die, which is also very possible? And so time will tell how, and I think it'll vary between committees as well as to how do they use their subcommittees. So that's something that's really
That is some
fascinating.
really inside baseball stuff there. I'm sure our folks will be watching that too. Mine, a little bit less serious, political Super Bowl ads.
Oh, yeah.
There's always a few. There's always some. 2 or 3 years ago, or when Trump was in, the great Alice Johnson, she's a good friend of the organization. She was featured in a Super Bowl ad on criminal justice and made a lot of waves and led to, frankly, the First Step Act. Or no, that was after the First Step Act. But it was a promotion of some legislation that had passed. So that's that was a big step. But I'm just curious. Who's going to surprise and suddenly, Kamala's going to, reignite her 2028 campaign or something like something. There's going to be some kind of political surprise and it'll pop.
Well, I got a question for you then. How many undeserved yards and penalties are the Kansas City Chiefs going to get?
Easy. We've got
Jefferson's
Jefferson.
I'm going to look really bad. Jefferson's going to edit this thing. I'm going to look.
Yeah, we haven't. We did a lot on the Super Bowl last week, but we haven't brought in Jefferson to get his predictions. Any predictions, Jefferson, on the Super Bowl?
Chiefs by 3.
Chiefs by 3.
All
okay,
right.
Chiefs by 3. All right. So that I don't know what the line is, but that's probably covering. Yeah, actually.
Not that you're tracking it.
But and I do. I'm one of those people. I like the Super Bowl ads.
Oh, yeah.
I like the fun,
It's
the
fun.
Dorito ads or Pepsi or whatever you have or whatever have you. So a lot of times they're more interesting than the game, unfortunately. So, all right. Well, thanks for stepping in.
Yeah,
Thanks for sitting in for Derek. We will look under the couch cushions and find him for next time. Hopefully he's around here somewhere. I know he's listening and probably laughing now. But thank you for being here with us. We
My
appreciate
pleasure.
you stepping
Thanks for
in
having me.
and explaining all that to us because I think that was really informative for our listeners and even for me because I didn't know a lot about cybersecurity, cyber task force and all that. So, and of course, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. As we like to say at the end of every show, in the immortal words of Sam Houston, do good and risk the consequences. We'll see you next time.